I sparked a discussion not too long ago regarding the use of buckshot versus birdshot for self-defense, and what exactly is the amount of penetration regular folks should be looking for in a good self-defense load. To be honest, I didn't think there would be any major difference of opinion on the subject at the time, and so I made this video to try to better articulate certain rationale and share some evidence. Some people say you should use birdshot for home defense because it doesn't overpenetrate through walls and potentially pose a risk to a family member or an innocent bystander like a regular load of double-aught buckshot could in the same situation. If you want to use birdshot because of its limited penetration through walls and other barriers, you also have to acknowledge that it means that an assailant using a wall or piece of furniture as cover means that your ammunition is probably next to useless. The same applies if the assailant is wearing thick clothing as well. Also, the word overpenetration doesn't actually apply to walls. A wall is only penetrated when a projectile goes through it. When a projectile goes through a human and exits, that is what is called overpenetration. When a projectile goes to 18 or more inches in ballistics gel, that means overpenetration is likely in a human target. Most standard velocity double-aught buckshot will overpenetrate. Now we have clarified what people mean, and we know that some people want to use birdshot in the scenario that at least one round misses the intended target. If no rounds miss the intended target, then any alleged advantage of birdshot is quite irrelevant in that situation. I say this because it's quite easy to select buckshot that will not overpenetrate through the intended target. For example, Federal PowerShock No. 4 buckshot has roughly 13 inches of penetration. How do we really know how much penetration is enough or too much though? Going back to 1987, we see that these numbers that everybody talks about come from a wound ballistics workshop as a result of a disagreement in the FBI whether they should use 9mm or .45 caliber duty handguns. The disagreement was settled by testing done and with the input of various experts. Since the context was specifically law enforcement use and handgun calibers here, people have misinterpreted the conclusions about wounding factors and assumed that they only apply to law enforcement use with handguns. The criminals that law enforcement has to deal with are the same criminals that regular folks have to deal with, so the conclusions apply to anyone who wants to use effective ammunition. Trying to draw a distinction between effective civilian ammunition and effective law enforcement ammunition is largely like trying to draw a distinction between paint that is put on the ceiling versus paint that is put on the walls. Ammunition made for law enforcement use is generally held to somewhat of a higher standard in the fact that it is expected to go through barriers and still be effective, but there is nothing stopping the individual from expecting his ammunition to meet the same standards. Likewise, a small-town police department may decide to not use ammunition that is specifically marketed for law enforcement use. The FBI's minimum penetration requirement of 12 inches in ballistics gel comes from the penetration needed to reach the important organs like the heart from less than ideal angles. A bullet that gives shallow penetration severely limits the effectiveness of the weapon in these situations. More penetration gives you more margin for error in this respect, which is why they said penetration up to 18 inches was ideal. Once you go past 18 inches, then overpenetration becomes likely. The workshop concluded that most of the rounds fired in law enforcement shootings do not hit the intended target. To them, fear of overpenetration is largely erroneous, aka it's a belief that is based off of a misunderstanding. There is an exception though when we are talking about deep penetrating ammo like full metal jackets. It is also irrational to believe that a round that goes through the intended target is somehow more dangerous than the rounds that miss the intended target and retain all of their energy. Choose underpenetrating ammunition because the fears of overpenetration can severely limit your effectiveness and get you killed. This is not a matter of opinion, but is easily demonstrated and illustrated with the FBI Miami-Dade shootout. These principles do not only apply to handguns because basic human biology and dimensions is also encountered with shotguns and rifle rounds as well. Obviously, the underpenetration that happened in the Miami-Dade shootout involved a handgun round and not birdshot, so let's talk specifically about birdshot here. There's a security camera video available on YouTube that shows a school shooter using a shotgun to hit a woman in a library with birdshot from close range, a number of feet really. I'm obviously not going to play the footage here, but rather give a brief summary. She was hit in the shoulder, and it appears that her reaction is more or less unimpressed. As she looks at the wound, then she stands and wanders a bit before she takes out her phone as she walks away. For home defense, the reason that you are firing a weapon to begin with is because the target has demonstrated the capacity and imminent intent to do serious harm to you or a loved one. If birdshot does not physically incapacitate the target, then he chooses the outcome of the encounter and who ends up going to the coroner at the end of the day, because he has already demonstrated the willingness and capacity to do serious harm. If an assailant runs off with a superficial wound inflicted with birdshot without using his weapon on you, he has still determined the outcome of the encounter, even though the use of your generally ineffective ammunition has made him reconsider his plan of pistol whipping you for your beautiful flat-screen TV. For some reason, some people will act as if ruining the assailant's day is the standard to be met for ammunition to be used for home defense. I don't doubt that being shot with birdshot is unpleasant to say the least, but this idea shows that some people have lost all perspective. The goal should be to incapacitate, not to inflict pain and suffering. Generally speaking, most criminals will choose to stop assaulting you if you demonstrate the intent and ability to defend yourself with a firearm. This is referred to as a psychological stop as opposed to physical incapacitation, and you'll likely get the same immediate response if you shoot an assailant with rubber buckshot. If you absolutely insist that you want to use birdshot in spite of everything that I have said, then it would make sense for you to have only your first round be birdshot and the rest be buckshot. The reason for this is that if most criminals are deterred by the psychological effect of being shot at, then you don't need more than one round to achieve this. If one round does not stop them, then they require actual physical incapacitation, even if they provide a poor angle. Buckshot is the tool for this job. This is another example, this time involving a burglar who broke into someone's house and was shot in the face with birdshot. The burglar ran off and found somewhere to fall down. He was taken to the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. So you may naturally say that this kind of birdshot wasn't very effective, so you'll just use a better birdshot. And if your intent is to use birdshot that does the most amount of damage, then you might choose a powerful load that uses larger pellets. For example, a 3-inch Magnum turkey load. A significant amount of interior walls in the US are made out of drywall, which is why someone may choose birdshot to begin with. So, would you feel comfortable using a 3-inch turkey load on an assailant, with the chance that if one of those rounds miss, it will hit a bit of drywall before a loved one? Obviously not, because that sort of thing is dangerous and foolish. Which of these competing things has to go for you to feel comfortable defending your house? If your house has a particularly bad layout that would put an intruder between you and a family member's bedroom, for example, what are your options? You could choose to use buckshot and kneel down before you shoot, which would hit the assailant in the face, and if you miss, your roof or second floor gets damaged. This is not the best option because it would limit your mobility and doesn't entirely remove the danger of missing. Changing the layout or construction of your house could be expensive but not impossible. What if we made a specific wall more bullet resistant though? Let's say we sandwich a mixture of sand and gravel between plywood and put that in front of a specific wall. That would give us a lot more confidence that a stray load of buckshot would not hurt a loved one, especially if you use small buckshot, like number 4 to begin with. You could definitely use other substances as well, like layers of ceramic. Anyway, the point is that it's possible to change the material of the barrier in front of the family member instead of choosing ammunition that has questionable effectiveness in order to make up for the poor house layout and interior wall construction. I do not know of any cases where civilians shot through an assailant in self-defense and inadvertently injured someone else who was not a threat as well. This isn't because that sort of thing has never happened, but is likely due to selection bias. For example, I don't have access to every news story, and not every news story may include such details because of a lack of detailed information at the time. It is much easier to point to police numbers in regards to overpenetration because that's the sort of thing police keep track of, whereas civilian incidents would be found in local news stories. For example, from 1995 to 1996, the NYPD were still largely using full metal jacket rounds. There were 44 officers struck by police gunfire at this time, and 17 of those officers were hit with full metal jacket bullets that passed through someone else first. The danger of overpenetration is quite real if you use the wrong ammunition, and it's not something that you can just dismiss if you live in a very densely populated area. Missing can definitely be a problem, but in comparison you can prevent basically 100% of overpenetration cases by choosing the right ammo. From looking at different news stories, it seems that ordinary carelessness is what results in more injuries or deaths than rounds that miss or overpenetrate during home invasions. When we get a little too tied up in the overpenetration discussion, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. Let's say we have two family members in a house. It is far more likely that the one confronting the assailant is shot and killed than one family member accidentally shoots the other during the home invasion due to overpenetration or missing.